The sun hung mercilessly over the rugged hills of Hispania. Dust rose in golden swirls carried by a wind that smelled of iron and sweat. In that heat beneath a pale blue sky, an army waited silent, tense, and uncertain. At its center stood a man whose calm seemed almost unnatural amidst the chaos. His armor was plain, his cloak marked by travel, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, spoke of something far greater: Julius Caesar. It was the summer of 49 BC. Rome, once united, was tearing itself apart. Two names divided the Republic: Julius Caesar and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known as Pompey the Great. Friends, once rivals now. Caesar had crossed the Rubicon just months earlier, a decision that made peace impossible. He had defied the Senate, defied Pompey, and defied the very laws of Rome. Now, after seizing Italy in a lightning campaign, Caesar turned his gaze toward Hispania, where Pompey's legions under Lucius Afranius and Marcus Petreius waited. These were veterans, disciplined, experienced, loyal to Pompey. They controlled the high ground, the bridges, and most importantly, the food supplies. Caesar's men, though, brave and devoted, were weary and far from home. The odds were against him. The terrain around Ilerda was unforgiving: steep ridges, sudden rivers, and scorching winds that dried the throat before a word could be spoken. Each movement was a risk each night, a question of survival. Yet Caesar's gaze never faltered. War, he once said, is not won by numbers, but by nerve. That was his weapon now, not swords or siege engines, but nerve. His officers gathered around him near the edge of their camp, their armor reflecting the dying light. The murmurs of concern grew louder. With every passing day, supplies were running low, and scouts reported that the enemy had cut off the roads leading south. Some soldiers whispered that they were trapped. Others feared the coming hunger more than the enemy's blades. But Caesar's voice, calm and steady, sliced through the uncertainty. "Gentlemen," he said, "if they think they've trapped us, they have already lost. Because they no longer understand how I think. No shouting, no bravado. Just certainty, the kind that infects every heart that hears it." He paced along the line of his men that evening. Faces smeared with dust looked up at him: farmers from Gaul, traders from Italy, sons who had not seen their fathers in years. To each he gave the same nod, the same quiet acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough. From a distance, Afranius watched the scene unfold from the hills above. He had fought many battles, served under great generals, but something about this man disturbed him. "He doesn't move like a trapped commander," Afranius muttered. "He moves like a hunter waiting for the prey to tire." Beside him, Petreius laughed harshly. "Let him play his games. The mountains favor us, not him. Let's see how long his men can survive without bread or water." But Caesar understood what his opponents did. Not that battles were not always fought with weapons. Some were fought in the silence between storms and the patience of a man who could wait longer than his enemy dared. As night fell, the horizon of Hispania turned red not from blood, but from the glow of campfires that dotted the valley. The sound of hammers striking wood echoed as Caesar's men worked through the darkness, building, repairing, preparing. Above them, the stars shimmered like embers scattered by the gods themselves. A young centurion approached Caesar and hesitated before speaking. "General, what if the rains return? What if the bridges fail again?" Caesar looked toward the shadowed outline of Ilerda, his expression unreadable. "Then we build new bridges," he said softly. "And if the river itself rises against us, we'll teach it to change its course." The centurion bowed, his fear dissolving into awe. Somewhere beyond the hills, the enemy's campfires burned bright. But Caesar didn't see an obstacle, he saw opportunity. Every disadvantage, every failure was just another problem to be solved. That was his genius, to make men believe that the impossible was merely an inconvenience. He turned to his aide, gesturing toward the darkness ahead. "Mark my words," he said, "this war will not be remembered for the blood it spilled, but for the minds it tested." A gust of wind swept through the camp, carrying with it the scent of rain and smoke. It rustled the standards bearing the crimson SPQR. The soldiers looked up as if sensing that something far greater than war was about to begin. Because in the weeks to come, Julius Caesar would achieve what no general before him had: victory without slaughter, conquest without cruelty. But that was still ahead. For now, in the Valley of Ilerda, under the relentless Spanish sun, the greatest strategist of Rome was waiting, silent, patient, ready to rewrite the meaning of war itself. The rain came without warning. What had once been a golden valley beneath the Spanish sun was now swallowed by a storm so fierce that even the hills seemed to tremble. The Segre River, swollen by days of relentless downpour, tore through the land like a beast unchained. Bridges collapsed under the weight of the floodwaters, wagons and supplies vanished into the current, and the roads that once led to safety disappeared beneath a sea of brown and foam. For Caesar's army, it was a nightmare. The men huddled in their soaked cloaks, staring at what used to be their lifeline, the bridges that connected them to food, reinforcements, and Rome itself. Now all that remained was the deafening roar of the river. Hunger crept into the camp like a silent enemy, and whispers of doubt began to spread faster than the flood. "Maybe the gods have abandoned us," one soldier muttered, his voice trembling as thunder rolled across the valley. Another spat into the mud. "Or maybe we followed the wrong general." But inside his tent, Julius Caesar was silent. He stood over a large map spread across a wooden table, water dripping from his cloak onto the parchment. The flickering light from an oil lamp cast shadows across his face, calm, unreadable, deliberate. His officers waited, nervous and uncertain, expecting an outburst, a sign of anger, something. But instead, Caesar reached for his stylus and began to draw. "If nature blocks our path," he said quietly, his tone firm but controlled, "then we will make nature move." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young tribune named Gaius, dared to speak. "You mean, build new bridges. The river's too wide, the ground's too soft." Caesar looked up, and Gaius fell silent. "Not bridges," Caesar replied, tapping the map. "A new river." The words hung in the air like lightning. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Caesar's mind was already at work, calculating depths, terrain, manpower. He ordered his engineers to dig channels that would divert the floodwaters, turning the river's strength into his advantage. That night, under the pounding rain, hundreds of soldiers took up shovels and pickaxes. The ground was cold and slick, and every step sank into the mud. But still they dug. The sound of metal striking earth echoed through the valley like a heartbeat, slow, steady, defiant. At first they worked in silence, their hands blistered, their bodies shivering. Some cursed their fate, others cursed the rain. But as hours turned into days, something began to change. The men saw the ditches widen, the water shift, the current bend. The impossible was happening, the river was obeying their general. In the flicker of torchlight, a centurion shouted, "It's working! Look, it's turning!" The soldiers lifted their heads, and in that moment, even the thunder seemed to pause. The Segre River, mighty and furious, was being guided not by gods, but by the will of one man. From his tent, Caesar watched the transformation unfold. He said nothing, only stepped forward into the rain, letting the cold water run down his armor. His aide Lucius approached and spoke softly. "Sir, the men are exhausted. Some haven't slept in 2 days." Caesar's eyes stayed fixed on the river. "Then they will rest when the current does." Lucius hesitated. "And if it doesn't?" Caesar turned to him, his voice calm, steady, and absolute. "Then we teach it to." A faint smile crossed Lucius's face, not of amusement, but of faith. By the third day, the floodwaters had begun to recede, their strength redirected by the channels the soldiers carved. The roads reappeared, and the camp, once drenched in despair, now buzzed with energy. Men who had once doubted began to believe again. One night, as the storm finally broke, a soldier whispered to his comrade, "We don't need the gods anymore. We have Caesar." The words spread quietly through the ranks, carried by the glow of campfires and the steady rhythm of tools striking earth. It wasn't shouted or sung, just felt like a warmth that spread through every tent, every heart. Above them, the stars returned to the sky, faint but steady like promises kept. And in that fragile calm after the storm, Caesar stood alone at the edge of the new river. The wind tugged at his cloak as he looked toward the enemy camp, its fires still flickering in the distance. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He only whispered to himself, barely audible over the night air, "This is just the beginning." The river flowed silently below, no longer a barrier, but a path, one that would carry him and Rome toward destiny. By dawn, the rain had vanished, replaced by a blazing sun that turned the valley into a furnace of dust and glare. The Segre River now flowed quietly behind Caesar's army, no longer a threat but a silent witness. His soldiers, leaner and hungrier than before, stood ready beneath banners still wet from the storm. The moment of waiting was over. Caesar's engineers had completed the last of the crossings at night. As the mist lifted, his legions poured across the newly built causeways, their armor glinting like scales of light. The sound of their boots striking earth was steady and rhythmic, like a single giant heartbeat. From the hilltop fortress of Ilerda, Lucius Afranius watched the movement unfold below him. His face, normally stern and controlled, tightened as he realized what was happening. "He's not retreating," he muttered. "He's surrounding us." Beside him, Marcus Petreius slammed his fist against the parapet. "We have twice his numbers. Why are we sitting here like cornered animals? Let's march out and crush him before he builds another damn wall." Afranius shook his head slowly. "That's exactly what he wants. Every move we make, he's already counted," Petreius growled. "Then what? Sit and starve while he plays games with the river?" But even as they argued, Caesar's formations tightened. His troops moved with uncanny precision, not shouting, not charging, only advancing in eerie silence. When the signal came, a single horn blast echoed across the plain. The sound carried through the air like a command from another world. Down below, shields rose as one. Standards tilted forward. The legion advanced slow and deliberate, like a tide reclaiming the shore. The sun beat down mercilessly. Dust clung to sweat and steel. The air trembled with the hum of discipline. No chaos, no cries, just the rhythm of order. Every step drew the circle tighter around Ilerda. Afranius felt it, the invisible noose closing. Petreius, red-faced and furious, turned to him. "If we stay, he'll suffocate us. If we move, he'll strike." "So which is it?" Lucius Afranius' voice was low, almost resigned. "He's not fighting us, Marcus. He's bleeding us." A messenger ran into the tent breathless. "General, the eastern road is blocked. Caesar's cavalry took the ridge last night." Afranius' eyes widened. That ridge was miles from his camp. How? By moving while we argued? Petreius spat bitterly. Back in Caesar's lines, the general stood atop a small rise overlooking the valley. The heat shimmered around him, but his focus was unbroken. His officers awaited orders, but he didn't rush them. Instead, he traced a finger along the dirt at his feet, an invisible map in his mind. Every road the enemy could take he had already sealed, every escape already denied. When his aide approached and asked, "Shall we press the attack?" Sir Caesar shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Let hunger do what swords cannot." He turned to look at the distant hills where the enemy's banners fluttered weakly in the heat. "Every path I close," he murmured, "is one more sword I never have to draw." The order spread. Hold the line. Tighten the ring. Wait. Days turned into weeks. The Pompeian camp, once alive with the confidence of numbers, grew quiet. Rations dwindled. Horses died. Men quarreled over scraps of grain. In the evenings, the smoke from Caesar's campfires glowed like a halo on the horizon, a reminder that discipline could be a weapon sharper than steel. Afranius could feel the morale of his army breaking. His men no longer looked to him for hope. They looked toward Caesar's camp, where order and purpose still lived. Finally, one desperate night, Petreius snapped. "Enough of this waiting, I'll lead the cavalry myself and break his damn circle." He stormed out before Afranius could stop him. The clash came before dawn, hooves thundering through the valley, torches burning like stars in the darkness. Petreius' charge hit Caesar's outer line with all the force of desperation and broke against it like waves on stone. Arrows streaked through the air. Shields locked. The night filled with the sound of metal and screams. Within an hour, it was over. The Pompeians fell back in chaos, their charge crushed, their courage shattered. Caesar, watching from the ridge, didn't smile. His officers waited for the command to pursue, to finish it, but he raised a hand. "No," he said. "No more blood." They looked at him puzzled. He turned toward the smoking plain below. "We've won already. Let them see mercy where they expected death. The war ends faster that way." His words carried softly across the wind, almost like a prayer. The dawn that followed was quiet, eerily so. The valley smelled of rain, sweat, and defeat. And as Caesar rode through the mist toward Ilerda, even his enemies could not help but feel the weight of something greater than victory. He had conquered them not with force, but with control. The night after Petreius's failed charge was heavy with silence. No horns, no shouts, no clashing steel, only the faint crackle of dying campfires and the whisper of the wind moving through the deserted valley. The battlefield smelled of smoke and despair. By dawn, Ilerda was still. The once proud camp of Pompey's legions now lay quiet, stripped of its defiance. Tattered banners hung limp over the ramparts. The smoke from cooking fires had vanished. No one was eating, no one was speaking. The only sound was the soft creak of armor as weary men stood motionless, waiting for orders that would never come. Afranius stepped outside his tent, his cloak draped loosely over his shoulders. His face was pale, drawn thin by exhaustion and humiliation. Petreius stood beside him, still armored, his eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep. "They're finished," Petreius muttered. His voice was low but hard, like stone grinding against stone. "Another day and they'll start deserting." Afranius didn't answer immediately. He looked toward Caesar's encampment across the valley, disciplined, orderly, alive. The red standards of the legions fluttered in the morning, breeze steady and unbroken. "He's already won," Afranius said at last. Petreius frowned. "Then we fight. We die standing." But Afranius shook his head. "No. Dying isn't victory. It's surrender by pride." Petreius turned sharply, disbelief etched across his face. "You would yield to him, to the man who defied the Senate." To the traitor, Afranius's gaze hardened. "To the man who outthought us, outlasted us, outplayed every move we made. There's no shame in bowing to mastery." He took a deep breath and called for his aid. "Bring the white standard." The camp stirred as soldiers realized what was happening. A murmur spread, uncertain, fearful, relieved. Two generals, the last defenders of Pompey's cause in Hispania, were preparing to surrender. As the morning light broke across the valley, Afranius and Petreius rode forward slowly, side by side. The ground beneath their horses was dry and cracked, still bearing the scars of trenches and fires. They carried no weapons, only the white cloth that fluttered gently in the wind, a symbol older than Rome itself. From Caesar's side, no one moved until he did. The general stepped forward from his ranks, his cloak still stained by dust and rain. His soldiers watched silently, hands resting on the hilts of their swords, but no one drew. Caesar walked alone into the no-man's land between the two armies. The air was so quiet that each hoofbeat of the approaching horses echoed like thunder. When the generals dismounted, they stood before him, heads bowed, the weight of defeat heavy in every motion. Afranius was the first to speak. His voice trembled, but not from fear. "You've won, Caesar," he said. "And yet you never fought us." Caesar regarded him for a long moment before answering. His tone was calm, steady, almost weary. "I didn't need to," he said. "The war was never about who could kill more men. It was about who remembered why they fought." Petreius's eyes narrowed. "And what do you fight for? Caesar, power, Rome yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Caesar replied, his gaze unwavering. "I fight to end wars like this one." Neither Afranius nor Petreius could answer. The wind carried their silence across the empty field. Behind them, Pompey's soldiers began laying down their weapons, slowly, hesitantly, at first, then all at once. Swords fell into the dirt. Shields dropped with dull thuds. No cheers, no cries of triumph, just the heavy quiet of an army realizing it was finally over. Caesar raised his hand to his own men, signaling restraint. "No celebration," he said softly. "We honor discipline, not destruction." The legionaries nodded, standing at attention. No one cheered. They only watched their commander with reverence, not for his victories, but for his control. Afranius looked up, his voice breaking slightly. "History will say, you won without bloodshed." Caesar turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the first light of morning painted the hills in gold. "Then let it say," he replied, "that mercy was the sharpest weapon I ever carried." As he spoke, the sun rose over Hispania, brilliant, unrelenting, the same sun that had watched the storms, the hunger, the defiance. Now it shone on a peace carved not by sword or spear, but by will and restraint. Caesar climbed the ridge overlooking the valley. Below him, thousands of men once divided by cause now shared the same silence. Behind him, the crimson banners of Rome caught the wind again. For a moment he stood there not as a conqueror but as a man who understood the terrible cost of victory. And when he finally turned away, the narrator's voice softened. The Battle of Ilerda ended not with the clash of blades, but with the quiet triumph of mind over muscle of compassion over conquest. History rarely praises mercy, yet it remembers it far longer than blood. The scene faded with the sound of wind through the valley, not mourning, not triumph, but peace. As the sun climbed higher over the valley of Ilerda, Caesar's figure stood motionless against the horizon, a lone silhouette framed by light. The battle was over, yet the silence that followed felt heavier than any victory cheer. His men waited, but he gave no speech, no gesture of triumph. There was nothing to prove. The real victory had already been won, not over his enemies, but over himself. That morning, Rome gained more than territory. It gained a reminder that power is not measured in conquest, but in control. Caesar had shown the world that true strength lies not in destruction, but in discipline. He had faced a storm, a river, 2 veteran armies, and the crushing weight of isolation, and he conquered them all, not with rage or vengeance, but with patience and strategy. His victory at Ilerda was not written in blood, but in restraint. It was a triumph of mind over chaos. The lesson endures across the centuries. Every life in its own way faces an Ilerda, a place of pressure, doubt, and despair. For some, it's a moment when everything collapses, the bridges burn, the path forward floods, and the world seems determined to corner you. For others, it's quieter, a private war against fear, anger, or regret. And in those moments, the story of Julius Caesar at Ilerda whispers across time. If nature blocks your path, make nature move. He refused to surrender to circumstance. He refused to let emotion dictate judgment. Instead, he found clarity in the storm. That's what made him more than a soldier. It made him a strategist of life itself. Think about that for a moment. How many of us, when cornered, lash out instead of thinking, how many burn bridges when we could build new ones? How many wars at work, at home, within ourselves could be won not by force but by patience? Caesar's greatest weapon was never his sword. It was his mind, sharp, flexible, calm. It's what allowed him to see opportunity where others saw ruin, to turn failure into foundation. He once said that it is better to create than to destroy, and in the muddy fields of Hispania, he proved it. When the enemy surrendered, he did not revel in their downfall. He didn't parade their shame through the streets. Instead, he showed mercy because he understood that peace built on understanding is stronger than victory built on fear. In that choice, Caesar became something larger than a conqueror. He became a mirror for humanity itself, a reminder that leadership, whether of men or of one's own heart, is not about domination, it's about direction. And perhaps that is why his story still matters today. In a world obsessed with winning in business, in arguments, and image, we often forget that the greatest victories are the quiet ones, the ones where you hold your temper, the ones where you refuse to give in to hate, the ones where you build when others destroy. That's the real genius of Ilerda. It wasn't a battle of blood and glory. It was a test of patience, intellect, and compassion, virtues that outlast empires. So if you ever find yourself trapped by life, when the world feels too heavy, when everything you've built seems to crumble, remember Caesar standing by that river soaked in rain, whispering to himself that he would teach the water to change its course. Because that's what we all must do, sooner or later, face the floods that threaten us and find a way through them. No, not everyone can be Caesar. But everyone can learn to think like him, calm in chaos, firm in faith, steady in the storm. And if you do, you may find that your greatest victories come not from conquering others, but from mastering yourself. So if this story moved you, if you believe that the greatest strength is the power to stay calm when everything breaks, share it. Tell someone who needs it, because somewhere, someone might be standing at their own Ilerda right now, wondering if they can make it through. Let them hear this truth. The true battle is not against others, but within ourselves. And as the echo of those words fades, imagine the sound of the wind sweeping across the valley, the same wind that once carried the banners of Rome, now carrying something greater, the timeless whisper of victory born from wisdom. Soft footsteps fade. The sound of the wind rises. A single heartbeat, and then silence.